Good morning. Out of my little chomps with the dogs this morning, and I thought I haven't done a walk with me recently, and so I thought I would kick off my day with one today. And I actually have notes today because I have a lot to say about the topic of belonging, and I wanted to make sure that I didn't ramble too much and stayed on point because it's probably going to be, I'm guessing about a 10-minute little video today. So the sun is right in my eyes at the moment. I'm about ready to bushwhack through some bushes here too. But anyway, the topic today is belonging. And belonging, as you may or may not know, it's a fundamental human need, a psychological state where individuals feel connected or accepted as part of a group or community. And it involves feeling valued, appreciated, included, and supported. And yet, over half, I think the numbers are 52% in the study that I saw, 52% of Americans report feeling lonely. Just under half report that the relationships that they do have with others are not meaningful. And so this is a public health crisis because loneliness is as deadly as a 15 per day cigarette habit. It's associated with a greater risk of heart disease, dementia, stroke, depression, anxiety, and even premature death. So if you're among the 52% of people who are lonely, you might be thinking, hey, thanks a lot, Kristen. Now I'm even more depressed. And so the good news is, sorry, I'm wobbling there. The good news is that belonging isn't just about a sense of fitting in. Belonging, or a set of fitting in, it's not just bestowed on us by some external source, as so many of us think. Belonging is a verb. It takes action, and a series of actions, in fact. And the first is simply to acknowledge that you are lonely and you have a desire to belong. So for some reason, especially if you're a Gen Xer before, like me, we were raised with the idea that we need to be self-sufficient, that it's weakness to ask for support, that we have to rely on ourselves. And I'm here to tell you that is bullshit. Forgive me if that's offensive to you. I was going to just say BS, but I am working on not censoring myself as much anymore. And I don't swear super often, but sometimes they just do come out. So there are other concepts that are in play here that I'm going to expose. And the first one is called risk regulation theory. And this isn't a bad thing. This is just human nature. But this is where you're tiptoeing on this narrow bridge or teeter-totter, trying to find a balance between seeking closeness and avoiding rejection. And there's this tricky system of if-then statements. We're all familiar with this, right? If so-and-so does this, then I will share this. But the problem, which is healthy. Like, I want to say this is a healthy balance that we need to find. Like, what is the right place on the fulcrum? But because of these other components that go into that place on the fulcrum is usually not, or usually shouldn't be quite as risk averse as we generally make it to be. So one of those other pieces are the liking gap. And this is where we underestimate, sorry, I'm wobbling in, where we underestimate how much others like us. In other words, people usually like us more than our own brains tell us they do. And then there's the beautiful mess effect, which is we think that when we're vulnerable, that people are going to judge us harshly. But the truth is that others are likely to see this vulnerability as a strength or an endearing trait, something that actually brings them closer to you. And just a really quick story from a couple years ago. I think I've talked about this in other places, but when I became a professional life coach, I had it in my head that I had to be seen as perfect, which of course, if you've been following me for a while, you know is absolutely not me. I am definitely not perfect. I've never been perfect, and I will never be perfect. But I thought I had to present this persona to the world that told everyone that I had it all together. And it took me a long time before I started letting go of those guardrails, though, you know, that part of the risk regulation theory, right, where I was not taking as many risks and just being myself, and I was trying to show up as this, you know, professional life coach. But a few years ago, after 2020, I'll just try to tell the story without all the backstories because I have my notes to keep me on track. So I was going to North Carolina for a business retreat, a coaching retreat, and the hotel we were staying at was far away from the airport, and there was no shuttle bus that would take me from the hotel to the airport. And I, living in the boonies as I do, I don't even think we have Ubers where I live here. We might have them, but they're certainly not very popular. They're just not here. And so I realized that I was going to have to take an Uber from the airport to the hotel. And now I could have taken a taxi, but taxis terrify me too, maybe even more than Uber. Because either way, you're getting into a car with a stranger, right? And speaking of risk averse, you're driving, you're paying money for the stranger to pick you up in their car and take you where you need to go. And I admit that I was a bit terrified. And so I asked my good friend Lisa, who told me, who does it all the time and lived in Seattle at the time. I asked her, like, hey, I'm terrified. How does this even work? And so she very kindly walked me through it, sent me screenshots, because that's who she is, and helped me see how the program worked. And so when I got back, here's the point of my story. When I got back, I actually posted on social media about this and said, oh my gosh, you guys, I was terrified. I did it anyway. I'm embarrassed about being terrified because it makes me seem like a, I don't know, someone who doesn't know anything about the world. But in response to that vulnerable post, so many people who heretofore had never responded to any of my posts responded to me and said, oh my gosh, I felt that way too. My first ride in an Uber was terrifying, yada, 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 right? And so I was like, I guess that's my point. I guess that this beautiful mess effect that I'm about ready to finish sharing with you actually has merit. And the beautiful mess effect is that when we're vulnerable, we worry that we're going to be judged harshly, but others are likely to see this vulnerability as a strength or an endearing trait. So another piece on this list is the acceptance prophecy. And this is when you assume that others will like you, you become warmer, friendlier, and more open. Sorry, I couldn't read my writing there. And more open. And then additionally, and then that's just, I'm going to pause on that for a minute so it can sink in. I'm going to say it again. It's the acceptance prophecy, which is when you assume that others like you, you become warmer, friendlier, and more open. And that just makes sense, right? If we're walking in the world afraid that others are going to dislike us, we're going to shut down. It goes back to that risk regulation again, right? But when we assume that they are going to like us, we're more likely to show up and be open and friendly. And then there's also just the fact that positive social interactions provide a sense of purpose, especially in older adults when there's not that sense of purpose that we derive from things like our jobs or raising our families or, some of those other external things that we get our sense of purpose for in our youth. So here are the action steps beyond the first action step, which is simply to acknowledge and become aware of all of these pieces that go into understanding that loneliness is unhealthy and belonging is a verb. These are the other action steps that you can take to help change that loneliness and create a sense of belonging. So the first step, and this is a practice, I'm inviting you to do this practice. The first one is to choose a group or an activity or a community, or it could even be a place if you're super hermit-like and introverted and people are not your thing. You can still belong yourself to a place. And I have other stories about that I can tell at a different time. But so the first step is to choose the group or activity or community or place that you're willing to put in some effort towards. And the next is to assume your own importance in this group. Speaking of the place-based thing, I'm going to wander off a little bit today, but I read a post, maybe it was, it was a post talking about a tree and maybe a big old growth type of tree that was in a park somewhere, and this little kid put a note on it and invited people to share. She put the note on that said why she loved that tree and invited other people to share it. Maybe you saw this too. But anyway, that is something. That little girl was belonging herself to that tree and inviting other people to share about the things that they loved. So assume your own importance. And remember that studies show this is true. This little girl, she assumed her importance, and she wasn't even conscious probably that she assumed her importance, but she took action and pinned it to the tree. So the third piece is to don't try to force it or rush it. Belonging takes time and consistent investment, and then also be discerning. Right? This is important. Remember the idea of risk regulation and find your aligned space, and just keep in mind that aligned space might be, again, discernment here, but might be a little bit more on the vulnerability side than on the pulling back side. And then give your gifts and uniqueness, your true self to that group or place. Again, that little girl. Allow yourself to be visible and ask yourself these questions. How would you show up differently if you believed you were necessary and liked? If you acted like that group or community or place believed that you belonged to it? How would you show up differently if you acted like you believed you belonged to it? So, for example, if you long for the friend who calls to check in, be that friend for someone else. If you ache to be recognized Allow yourself to be seen. If you long to be known, sit down and listen to someone else so you can discover the things that they love. This is how you belong yourself to yourself so that you can also belong in the world. And so I would love to hear from you down in the comments. What insights are you taking away from this lesson on belonging? Let me know. Much love. I'll try not to flip you upside down.